Thank you. So I'll introduce Kim Thomas to you this morning. Kim is a member of Working Group 7 and of Working Group 6. Kim is a freelance writer, journalist, and copyright and editor who publishes, please correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but among other papers in The Guardian. But Kim has joined this action because she's also CEO of the UK Birth Trauma Association, and she has been for some years. Yeah, she will present this morning in that hat as CEO of the Birth Trauma Association, and her keynote lecture is on how maternity care in the UK harms women and how research, so what you people are doing, how research helps us fight to improve it. I also would like to say that Kim has published 3 books, 2 guides, one for parents or aimed at parents on birth trauma, one guidebook for professionals on PTSD, and one book, which I would particularly like to point out, is called, please correct me if I'm saying it wrong, Kim, it's Broadmoor Women.
That's right, yes, yes.
And it's 7 stories of women that were assigned to a lunatic asylum in the UK in the 19th century.
That's it, yes.
And as you might gather from the title, and if you know Kim, they were not as lunatic as we might assume from the title, and it's really worth looking at and reading, and it's really touching stories, and I enjoyed it very much. End of advertising job. Kim, the floor is yours. We don't see your presentation yet.
I'm still getting the message host disabled participant screen sharing. So I'm not quite sure.
The nice gentleman is checking something.
Okay, thanks. It should be an easy change to make at the host end, actually, just on the sort of security options. It should sort of say allow participants to share.
I have no idea.
So we'll just wait while, but thanks very much for the introduction, and sort of really appreciate being invited here today. I worry a bit about going over time, so if you need me to hurry up, I'll do that, and I can skip some of the slides. Just let me know. Okay, this is good. Microsoft PowerPoint share. So it's sharing the right one. Right, sorry. Is it doing?
No, still not.
No, okay. To do this, I now have to go into my own computer, my settings in my own computer to allow it to share. So hopefully, does that work? Technology is all such a nightmare, isn't it? Let's try again. Oh no. Okay, I'm really sorry about this. I'm sorry to hold everything up, but I have to go into my own settings to allow it. It allows Zoom to share the screen. And that means leaving Zoom and then coming back in again. So do you mind if I do that?
No, just take your time. Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
We'll wait.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
People like each other. People are chatting.
Yes. So while we are filling in the time, so and just remember, please, to sign all the papers, Vivian, all the papers. So if you can sign all the papers, the reason why there are so many papers is because our university wants the original and the COST office wants the original. So you're signing twice for everything that you're doing, like morning, evening. And so it's important to sign. Otherwise, you don't get reimbursed. That's it, you know, and it's not our fault. So please sign everything. We noticed that some people signed some papers, but not all. If they're not all signed, you know, and it's a fresh set of papers every day. So, all right. The other thing is, those of you who still would like to join the event this evening, it will be at the restaurant, so there's no walking tour, because we're going to do a walking tour of Valletta, but then we realized that most of you have already been walking around anyway. So, but yes, we have a comment from Rita.
I'm always making comments, sorry. I hope since you are here, you have all gone just a small walk. Take care, because the pavements really, you can break your leg, so be careful. At least for me, I have to be very careful. But just a very small walk, I mean uphill. There is Castile Palace, and there is also the Upper Baracca. It is a really very beautiful. Yesterday you crossed across the harbor. I hope you enjoyed it, and you saw Fort St. Elmo, Fort St. Michael. I mean, there are the fortifications on the other side, and that was done by the Knights of Malta in the 16th century. Around 1550, they were renovating it, because in 1565 we had the Great Siege of Malta. Just to give you some briefings. And from the Upper Baracca, which Jean has kindly offered, you can see like a bird's eye view of the Grand Harbor, and you can see all the crooks and niches. That's how it is made, and that's a very lovely. At least I'm going to mention again Lord Byron. He mentioned that it is a unique sort of panorama. That's why I'm suggesting it. There is another, if you're staying here in Malta for a few days, which is the Lower Baracca. And from there, you can see also very well the breakwater, which was built by the British. in the beginning of the 20th century. So it's more than 100 years old. Make sure you go to the seaside if you're going to have a holiday, and make sure to try to go to Gozo. Gozo is a small island. You have to cross by the ferry. It's only around 20 minutes. You may see some dolphins in the sea. So that's, I cannot promise all this, but you can. There is also another small island. Sorry, I took over, but you know, I love, it's not promotion. It's that I love our country like Gene. And there is another small island, which is called Comino. It depends on how much time you have. There is the Blue Lagoon. It's very popular. It can be overpopulated also with tourists. But now the tourists are still not that much. I better that I stop.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you. And tonight the dinner is at 7, but I'll remind you again. Okay, so now we give the floor to Kim. Thank you for your patience, Kim. We can see your slides very well, so feel free to start. It's 7:30. Yes, I was going to move it till 7, just so that, I mean, people, because yesterday I noticed people were a bit hungry early. So I asked the lady to move it at 7, if that's okay. Yeah.
Kim, we can see your slides now and your screen.
Wonderful.
And do we
Yes,
have
I
sound?
had some problems because it made me log out and then it made me enter my password and I couldn't remember my password.
I'm sorry.
All that kind of thing. You know what it's like with technology. So,
but it works all right now, and we can see your screen, or is that like there's some?
Yeah. That is the screen. So it's fine. It should all be okay. I've got a couple of short video clips. If you know, if for some reason the connection fails, I'll skip over those because they're not necessary. And do let me know if I'm talking too much. So thanks very much again. So yes, as Katharina said, I'm going to talk about how maternity care in the UK harms women and how research helps us fight to improve it. So first of all, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me, a bit more about the charity I work for, the Birth Trauma Association. Then I'm going to talk about maternity care in the UK and the various problems it has. And then I'm going to talk about evidence in general and research in particular. So there's quite a lot to say, which is why I'm concerned about getting through it, but I'll do my best. So first of all, about me. So as Katharina says, I'm the CEO of the Birth Trauma Association. I'm also, as Katharina said, I'm author of a book about birth trauma aimed at women and their families, and a book aimed at health professionals as well, about postnatal PTSD. And the rest of the time, I'm a freelance journalist. And those are the books, if anybody wants to take a look at them. So about the Birth Trauma Association, we were founded in 2004, so nearly 20 years ago now. We were founded by two women, Maureen Treadwell and Debbie Sayer, and Maureen Treadwell is still part of the committee and active in the BTA. We are a small national charity. We're mostly staffed by volunteers, so I'm paid part-time. I have a colleague who is as well, but most people are volunteers. And we support both women and their partners who have been traumatised by the experience of birth. We also work with policymakers on issues relating to maternity care, and we campaign on birth and maternity. So, and that part of that includes educating health professionals, so doing training sessions and so on. So the main part of our remit is really helping parents with birth trauma. And when we started in 2004, birth trauma was a very sort of little known condition, but since then we've had an awful lot of mothers in particular come to us. So we have a private Facebook group, and that's been going since 2008, and it's grown enormously. It now has 16,000 members. 3 years ago at the start of the pandemic, it was only 7,000 members. So it's grown a lot recently. And that's a very helpful group for women to support each other, share their stories and offer mutual support. 4 years ago, we launched a peer support service over email, and we've now got quite a big team of 20 peer supporters doing that. And last year, we finally launched our phone support, which we've been hoping to do for a long time. And we have one other thing, which is fortnightly we run a Zoom block, being one of the peer supporters does that every 2 weeks, which is just kind of very sort of gentle, informal space for women to kind of talk about their feelings and their experiences. And this is just kind of sort of tribute really to how helpful the Facebook group has been. We did a survey of our members in 2020, and this is one of the quotes. The Facebook support group has really been so helpful. I'm sure I have PTSD, but still feel uncomfortable visiting or speaking to GPs, as I attempted once but felt brushed off. They also didn't have any details of my birth. So thank you for the safe, kind and informative space you've created. And I include that quote because it's kind of quite a common experience that women feel fobbed off by their GP, or they don't have support from health professionals. So they turn to us, and the fact they're able to speak to other women is helpful. And here is the first video clip, which is another one of our women talking about the Facebook group. So let's see if this works.
I found the Birth Trauma Association Facebook page really, really useful. Just being able to connect with other women who've been through similar experiences and to share stories is really positive and really reaffirming. And just that network of women to connect to is obviously just a really positive thing, but everybody on the Facebook page is just so supportive and so kind that you know that if anything comes up, you can pop a question on there and you'll be heard, you'll be respected, you'll be understood, and that's just fundamentally really important. So that's been really beneficial.
So that's us supporting parents, and we also do policy work. So, for example, when there's a consultation from the government about maternity issues, we do our best to respond to that. So there have been two quite recently: the Maternity Safety Inquiry and Women's Health Strategy, and those are on our website if you want to see our responses there. And they're sort of very much evidence-based responses. Also in the UK, we have the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, which draws up guidelines for doctors and other health professionals across a range of health issues to give them best practice. So those include maternity guidelines. And for the postnatal care guideline, we were actually on the working party for that. One of our committee members helped draw up that guideline, putting forward, the services of viewpoint, but also when these draft guidelines come out, they go out to consultation. We comment on those as well. We also work with professional organisations like Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the Royal College of Midwives to improve maternity care. So one example was the OASI project. This was about obstetric anal sphincter tearing and developing a care bundle to reduce tearing in childbirth. And again, we were putting the kind of service user viewpoint there. And then we do campaigns and awareness raising. So once a year in July, we have an awareness week, and we do social media challenges. So for example, one year we had the Baby Steps Challenge, where parents were invited to post a picture of their own shoes with their child's shoes together to illustrate their birth trauma journey. And the Hand in Hand challenge was a similar sort of challenge, posting a photograph of yourself holding a hand with a child or somebody who'd been supportive to you during your birth trauma, to illustrate the importance of connections after birth trauma. We took part in the But Not Maternity campaign during COVID pandemic, which was, the idea was to draw attention to the fact that the restrictions imposed on maternity that weren't imposed elsewhere, and the impact that was having on parents. We often work with newspapers and magazines to provide stories about birth trauma experiences to highlight the issue. And if there's a maternity story in the news, we provide media comment on that as well. And we offer training to health professionals, and that has included more recently training videos, which we launched this year. We created 3 training videos. So this is an example of coverage we had a few years ago in Awareness Week. This is one of our members, Olivia, who had postnatal PTSD. She was a midwife. She had placenta creta, and she had quite a frightening experience where she thought she was going to die as she went into the operating theatre, and she had PTSD afterwards. So she shared her story with a newspaper. And this is another sort of more recent one from this year, where one of our members who'd had 5 children said she'd had an experience always of finding maternity care belittled and infantilized women. And she had a very difficult experience in the most recent times. So she shared her story with the newspaper as well. I'm just going to show you a little video clip of our training videos. It's quite short. It's just a sort of promotional video, just to so you have an idea of the kind of thing we're doing.
I'm Anna Williamson. I'm a TV presenter and I'm also a mum too. Now, my first birth was extremely difficult. A traumatic birth can lead to mental health symptoms such as anxiety that can last for weeks, months, or even years. About a third of women say that they were traumatized by some aspect of giving birth.
We had a very traumatic birth experience. She contracted group B strep when she was born.
It was a very time-sensitive emergency. I didn't really want an epidural, but I didn't feel like I could voice it.
Sometimes people don't have PTSD, but they have lots of trauma symptoms. But one element of communication that can often be forgotten is listening.
Including her in all the decision making, really important.
They showed him to me. He smiled, I smiled, and I felt that rush of love that I hear other women talk about. To have been treated with the respect and dignity that I have and the care that I have has meant that I'm going into this confident.
So hopefully that gives a flavour of the kind of sort of training we're offering to health professionals. So now I want to talk about the failings in maternity care. In the past 3 years in the UK, there have been some major reports, major investigations into maternity care. And these have come about because parents at the different hospitals have had awful experiences and they've campaigned for public investigations. So what I find quite interesting about this is these are failings that were not picked up by the regulator. Probably should have been picked up by the regulator, but weren't. And one of our convictions at the BTA is that although there have been these 3 reports and 1 forthcoming, they represent a tip of the iceberg, and rather than being kind of isolated problems, they're very representative of the sorts of failings we have in maternity care more generally. So in the UK, the acute care is managed by trusts, and the trust might run one hospital or might run several hospitals. So the big reports, so the Morecambe Bay report in 2015, Shrewsbury and Telford in 2022, more recently the East Kent report in 2022 as well. And then there's going to be a report into Nottingham, which is currently ongoing. So I just want to say a little bit about the East Kent. Gives a flavour really of the problems in NHS maternity care, and the findings in East Kent were very similar to the findings in other inquiries. This is a little baby boy, Harry Richford, who died in 2017, and his family campaigned for answers. And so the report examined maternity services in 2 different hospitals in East Kent. And they found that over a period of 10 years, 45 babies had died needlessly because of substandard care. And so here are some of the sort of failings they identified. Gross failures of team working, so midwives and obstetricians often not working effectively together. Failures of professionalism, staff were disrespectful to women. Failures of compassion, failures to listen, failures after safety incidents. So typically that would mean a safety incident would happen and then it wouldn't investigate it properly or learn from it. And failures in the trust response. So when there was a safety investigation maybe and parents complained about it, the trust didn't respond adequately to that. and the regulators failed to identify the shortcomings when they should have done. So this is an example. These are some examples from the East Kent report of what parents said that professionals had said to them. So, for example, she said, "Sorry for your loss, but our baby was dead, and there were other babies who were still living that she needed to attend to. We have more important people on this ward. You're not the only one who's in need at this point." And that was a woman who'd been waiting for a blood transfusion. And then another one said, "The pain was horrific, but the midwives who examined me said I was fine. I was in so much pain that I couldn't place my feet flat on the floor. But they just told me I was doing well. I felt like nobody was listening to me and they couldn't be bothered." And those are the kind of things we hear all the time ourselves, unfortunately. And then East Kent, the report made 4 recommendations and said the NHS could be much better at identifying poorly performing units, giving care with compassion and kindness, team working with a common purpose, and responding to challenge with honesty. And those are things we would all really like to see improve as well. So for example, responding to challenge with honesty, we find quite often that when there is poor care, the response to the hospital is to try and cover it up or pretend it didn't happen, rather than kind of confront it and try to improve it. And this is just to kind of confirm really those kinds of findings. When we did our survey 3 years ago, we surveyed 798 women in our Facebook group. And I think this kind of gives an idea of the kinds of problems that women are experiencing. So 38% said procedures have been carried out without their consent. 52%, so more than half, said poor communication from staff was a factor in their birth trauma. And 35% said unkindness from staff was a factor in their birth trauma. So if you think about that, if you could tackle those things, which are really fairly basic things, you know, good communication, being kind rather than unkind, making sure you ask a woman for her permission before you carry out a procedure. If you could get all those things right, which after all are not difficult things, then you could hopefully reduce quite significantly the amount of birth trauma. And this is a typical quote from our survey. I relive the horrors that hospital put myself and my son through every day and night. I'll never be the same again. I'll never forgive certain doctors and midwives for what they did to my family. Unfortunately, what has been done cannot be undone, so must find a way to live again somehow. And I always like to share this particular cartoon that our member did. I tend to share this quite often when I'm talking to health professionals, because I think it gives such a vivid illustration of what it feels like for a woman with birth trauma, how she feels giving birth, where she's not, she's completely faceless, and all she can see is these doctors shouting at her things like cesarean, forceps, epidural, drugs, and she's completely dehumanized by it, and she's called that the stamp of medical approval. That's Kate Gilman-Brundrett. So obviously what we want to do is to kind of try and tackle all this and to improve maternity care. And we try and, wherever we can, to be evidence-based. So we do that in sort of 3 different ways, really. One is the service users who come to us, we try and give them support that is evidence-based. And when we respond to consultations or have any input into policy, we use evidence-based information. And when we campaign or we're asked for comment by the media, we try and make that evidence-based as well. So the evidence we use the guidelines from NICE, as I mentioned earlier. To a less extent, we use green top guidelines from RCOG. So these are professional guidelines for obstetricians. And we use statistical reports. So there's something very useful in the UK called the Embrace Report, which is from the University of Oxford, and they look at the statistics on both maternal death and stillbirth and neonatal death in the UK through audits. And that kind of gives a kind of very useful picture of what's happening in the UK in terms of maternity care. We also use NHS resolution support reports. This is the body that looks into litigation in the NHS, and they produce reports on how many incidents of litigation there were against the NHS. But they give quite a lot of detail on maternity, which is really useful, because the bulk of the money the NHS pays out in litigations is for maternity cases, because quite often they involve a child needing lifetime care. And of course, we also look at academic research, and I am going to come to that shortly. Academic research is very important to us. Just some examples of how we use evidence. So, for example, NICE has a guideline on post-traumatic stress disorder, which recommends two treatments, trauma-focused CBT and EMDR. So we always say to our members, those are the treatments they should ask for. And whenever we give it external comment as well, we will say use those treatments because they're the NICE recommended treatments, rather than a lot of kind of alternative treatments that sometimes people try to push on mothers with birth trauma. The NICE cesarean birth guidelines have been useful to us because one of the things that often happens when a woman has had a traumatic birth is she wants a good deal of control of her subsequent birth. And that might mean wanting a home birth, but it might also mean wanting a planned cesarean birth. And a lot of hospitals traditionally have turned down a women's request for planned cesarean birth. So that having that guideline which says, yes, you should respond positively to women's requests for cesarean if that's what they want, then that's been helpful for us making that case. And similarly, the RCOG guideline on VBAC it enables women to make a choice if they want a vaginal birth after cesarean. It presents both the benefits and the risks of doing that very clearly. The recent Embrace reports have been really useful in terms of highlighting the fact there are worse outcomes for Black women and their babies. So Black women are 4 times as likely to die in the months after childbirth as white women, and their stillbirth rate of their babies is double that of white women. So that kind of gives an opportunity for campaigning and policy change. So now I'm going to look at how research in particular has helped us have an impact on maternity care, and how hopefully it continues to do that. So I think we all know that until the early 2000s, the idea that birth could cause PTSD was ridiculed. So when we were founded in 2004, that was quite a difficult argument to make. That was the first job really, to persuade health professionals that actually women could have PTSD as a result of childbirth. So there were a number of pieces of research around that time, which I'm sure you're all aware of, so I probably don't need to give the references here, but Riding in 1997, Susan Ayres 2001, Creedy et al. 2000, McLean et al. Also in 2000, all showing, all helping to build up this picture that traumatic birth could lead to PTSD. And that has led to more and more research since then. And one of the really positive outcomes in the past couple of years is that the NHS in England has been rolling out perinatal mental services that are specifically focused on supporting women with birth trauma, and just kind of shows the change that's happened really over the space of 20 years, both as a result of this research, but then as a result too of our own campaigning work. And I think one of the other important ways in which it's helped us to have an impact is that we found that maternity professionals traditionally treat women as a homogeneous group, and tend to think of risk in particular as being kind of flat, kind of universal risk, whereas we always say you should think about women as individuals with different risk profiles and different preferences. So an older woman and a younger woman have different risk profiles. Women of different ethnicities might have different risk profiles. Women might have very different views on whether they want a birth without drugs, or a home birth, or water birth, or planned cesarean birth, any of those things. And it's really important to talk through women, what their risks are and what their preferences are. So one example research that helped with that was the sort of Hofberg and Blockington in 2000 showed the impact of tocophobia on women. if they're forced to give birth in a way that wasn't preferred way, that could lead to PTSD afterwards. Or there's some more recent research in 2017 showing that Asian women have greater risk of severe tearing in childbirth, which is particularly useful, for women in that group to know that. We also take part in research projects where we can. This has mostly been Maureen, who was our co-founder. So these, again, enable us to have a kind of patient input into research. So there was one piece of research called Stress and Wellbeing After Childbirth, which looked at whether self-help materials help women recover from psychological trauma after childbirth. And in fact, that piece of research found that they don't. And really, in fact, women, to cope with psychological trauma, women need face-to-face help. There's an ongoing project called Rotate, which looks at how to reduce maternal injury caused by instrumental delivery. So that's using a comparison of rotational forceps and manual rotation, because a lot of women who come to us have forceps injuries, and so that's kind of quite a big concern. So we had a patient representative on that. There's Discern, which is a sort of project that's now over, which looks at how transparency and candor can work following adverse maternity outcomes. Aspire, which is one that looks at personalised maternity care during the pandemic. And then there's one that's ongoing, which we've been involved in, which is the National Maternity and Perinatal Audit, which is a large-scale audit of maternity services across England, Scotland and Wales. So looking at more recent research, and so COST Action aims, I just wanted to quote these because I think these are really absolutely on point and really helpful. Research is not for researchers. Research is done to make people's lives better. In this case, the COST Action 18211 aims to make the lives of mothers, babies, fathers and partners and families better. And I think that's kind of a perfect summary, really, of what research in birth trauma should be doing. It's about making people's lives better, not just mothers, but the people around them as well, who are all very much affected by traumatic birth. So there are lots of research questions we'd like answered, but here's some of the ones that come up, either that we ask ourselves or people ask us. One is, how many women experience postnatal PTSD or birth trauma? How do you define traumatic birth? I get asked that all the time. How did the pandemic affect women's experience of birth? How does birth trauma affect relationships? So, for example, between mother and child and between parents. And how can we improve women's experience of birth? Obviously, there are many more questions than that about birth trauma, but I think those are some of the really kind of important ones. So I just want to say a little bit about research that's helped us with those. Can research help us answer those questions? Hopefully, yes. So incidence of postnatal PTSD, the ILDIS study, this has been really, really helpful to us, which is a review of research in 2017. Because up to that point, whenever anybody said to us, how many women develop postnatal PTSD, we didn't really know. And the estimates varied from between about 1% to about 10 or 15%, and sometimes even higher. And it's really hard to say, but that review of research put the figure at 4%. And that enabled us to translate that into a figure of about 25,000 to 30,000 in the UK. So that figure's on our website, and we use that all the time. So if you can say, yes, this affects 30,000 women a year, that's kind of much more powerful than saying, well, we're not really very sure. It's also really helpful in that it found a much higher prevalence amongst high risk groups, because one of the things we believe is very important is trauma-informed care, and understanding that if a woman's previously had mental health problems or she's had previous trauma, then she's much more likely to develop PTSD again. So that's really important. And then another sort of similar one from last year, which found a similar kind of prevalence of 4.7%. This sort of study looked at 154 studies. So again, it's very comprehensive. And this was really helpful because it found the prevalence of postnatal PTSD in fathers of 1.2%. So we can translate that into about 7,000 dads a year. And it is something we get asked a lot. I know, does this affect fathers? How many does it affect? So now we can give an answer to that. How birth trauma affects mothers. We've really kind of benefited from a huge number of qualitative pieces of research that have asked women how birth trauma affects them. And the examples I've mentioned there, work by Susan Ayres, Cheryl Beck and Kirsty McKenzie-McHarg, but actually there have been numerous other pieces of research as well, which have been really effective at showing how devastating traumatic birth can be, particularly on women's relationships and their ability to lead a normal life. So defining traumatic birth, I wanted to mention this piece of research from last year because it aims at formulating a woman-centered definition of traumatic birth. And one of the things we get asked is, how do you define traumatic birth? What do you mean by birth trauma? And what we always try and say is, if the woman found it traumatic, then it was traumatic. You know, we don't have a kind of objective definition. And I think this came up with a really, really good definition, which was, a traumatic childbirth experience refers to a woman's experience of interactions and or events directly related to childbirth that caused overwhelming, distressing emotions and reactions, leading to short and or long-term negative impacts on a woman's health and well-being. And that's really helpful because it's both drawn up in conjunction with clinicians and researchers, but also shared with mothers. And I think that kind of really covers really all the bases of traumatic birth. It covers everything that makes a birth traumatic. The fact that there can be numbers of interactions and events that can be traumatic during childbirth, and it can have a short-term and long-term negative effects on women's well-being. How the pandemic affected birth. This is a question we get asked a lot, and it was very difficult during the pandemic, trying to make the case that women's rights should be respected, while also acknowledging the fact that restrictions had to be in place. And of course, we had again a very sort of small involvement in this piece of research, in that we fed back on what was happening in the UK. So it was just looking at how the different countries imposed restrictions during the pandemic, and the effect that had on women, and the fact that women were losing out on emotional support in labour if their partner wasn't there. It demonstrated that countries had often inconsistent pandemic restrictions. So, for example, some countries, including the UK, actually allowed companions doing vaginal births, but not doing cesarean sections. And it sort of showed, you know, for a lot of women, that being separated from babies after birth, which happened to quite a lot of our members, could be really distressing. So it's really important for us having that research. This one is sort of fairly a sort of recent one, sort of Rebecca Webb et al., which looks at birth expectations and the mismatch between birth expectations and experiences, and how that might increase the risk of developing post-natal PTSD. And I think one of the things about that was that I identified the fact there wasn't sort of a huge amount of research, I think, but there was some research that showed there might be a risk of developing PTSD if women's experience of birth didn't match their expectations. One of the things women say to us a lot is that they go in with particular expectation of birth, and they're not prepared for what happens to them. And I think that was kind of useful as well in highlighting the importance of that and the need for more research. And again, mother-infant relationship. Something we also try and say when we have input into policy is that developing PTSD after birth can affect a woman's relationship with her child. And it's something women themselves tell us, that either they feel very indifferent to their child and they don't develop a bond, or they become excessively anxious about their child. but we don't really know for sure what the evidence is on that. And we don't know what the long-term impact of that might be, whether it does have a long-term impact or whether over time that bond forms and is repaired. So this particular piece of research from last year, reviewed 35 papers, that looks at the relationship between postnatal PTSD and the mother-infant attachment. And it found that there might be an association with an increased number of problems in the mother-infant attachment and child behaviour, but other domains remain scarcely investigated. So of course, one of the difficulties is there are a lot of confounding factors in research like this. You can't always be absolutely sure that it's the trauma that is causing the difficulty in relationship. But I wanted to highlight this because it kind of showed that this is an area where much more research is needed. And so it showed the fact that the research was being done, but there's still a lot of issues to look at. And this sort of was a piece of research from 2021. I'm sort of highlighting this because it's an issue that comes up for us all the time, which is that mothers say to us that the care they had during labour lacked compassion and lacked empathy. And that came up in the various reports, such as the East Kent report that I mentioned. And so this piece of research actually gave empathy training to 15 midwives. And I absolutely find the result of this research astonishing, really, because it found that it asked mothers who were attended by these midwives or how satisfied they felt with the birth. And those mothers whose midwives had been trained had sort of 94% satisfaction. But those gave birth before the training, there was only sort of 3%, which I think is an absolutely astonishing difference. Actually, I had to kind of read that 2 or 3 times to make sure I wasn't making a mistake. But it does illustrate really how compassion and care and kindness are absolutely central to improving the experience of birth to women and reducing the incidence of birth trauma. So those are just a few of the ones that I think have been really, really helpful for us in making the case for improving the maternity care in the UK. So some of the gaps that I think there still are in research is the impact of postnatal PTSD on family relationships. As we've seen, there has been some work on that, but there's still quite a lot of work to be done. And we know from our own experience that quite a lot of couples, their relationship breaks down after birth trauma and they split up. We're really interested to know more about that, and particularly in cases where the father as well or the partner has developed PTSD. How does PTSD affect women's working life? I would love to see more research on this because we have women come to us who can't go back to work after PTSD, either because of physical injuries or often because the workplace is triggering for them. Even things like sort of strip lighting in an office can be triggering for a woman. It can take her back to the moment of birth. Especially we find women who work in hospitals or healthcare settings often find it impossible to go back to work because the experience is so triggering. So I'd really like to see the impacts on that, and just to kind of, both from the point of view of the impacts on the woman, but also the kind of economic impact on that. What does it mean when those women can't go back to work? Why do some traumatic births lead to PTSD and others don't? And I think we're kind of getting towards the answer on that. But we do know that some women have traumatic births that don't lead to them developing PTSD. So what is making the difference there? And finally, what interventions can we make to reduce postnatal PTSD? And again, we have quite a lot of ideas on that, but we're really, really good to have more detail, more evidence that we can put forward to the NHS and to policymakers. So just to kind of sum up the benefits of research, for us, taking part in research projects, we offer patients or services the voice which might otherwise get missed. Quantitative research can help us explain the incidence of postnatal PTSD, and obviously that can be a spur to policymakers to do something about it, because it enables them to understand the scale of the problem. Qualitative research can show us the impact of traumatic birth on women's lives, and there have been a lot of good examples of that. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, research can help us effect change in maternity care. That's been a project for us for 19 years and will continue to be so, but it has made a real difference to us, and we're so really grateful for all the people who are doing research in this area and enabling us to make the case for improvements. Thank you.
Kim, can I just say thank you so much for that? We really appreciate it. There will be some questions from the floor, but just a couple of things, Kim, if I may. I just wanted to congratulate our researchers. Many of them are early career researchers who you've actually quoted, and there are 9 researchers in the audience today, and some obviously who are not with us are maybe online, so I think that's a phenomenal achievement for them. Can I also just say, Kim, if it's of any use to you, that we have 3 open access training modules on the CA18211 website that are free and easily accessible, and one of them happens to be trauma-informed care. So feel free to point anyone that wishes in the direction, especially when you've seen how much the impact of training can potentially have on healthcare professionals. One more thing, not wishing to speak for Julia and Inka, who are in the audience. I know you mentioned the definition of traumatic birth, but they've also recently published a definition of positive birth. So that might just be the flip for you, or the other side of things. And can I just take questions for you now, Kim, if that's okay? And I'm wondering if you could exit your slideshow so that we can,
yes, of
so
course.
that we can only see you as a little tile in the corner.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. So I think Ibane has a question.
You see us? Do I look somewhere? Do you see us? Okay. Hi, Kim. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation and for all the amazing work you do. And my question has to do with the women who, after birth trauma, want to take it to court. What is your experience, your advice, if you support the women through the legal processes, if you had any cases in the UK, how far they got? That's what I would like to.
Yes, that's a really interesting question, actually. We do have quite a lot of women approach us wanting to take legal action. And we have a medical negligence lawyer on our board of experts, and she's able to give free advice. So in fact, I should add to that almost any medical negligence lawyer in the UK will give free advice initially. So the way it works in the UK is that we have lawyers work on a sort of no win, no fee arrangement. So they will only take on cases that they think have a good chance of winning. And then if they do win, they'll take a chunk of the fee. And it is actually quite difficult to prove medical negligence, and it can take a long time. And if the hospital is obstructive, it can be very difficult, actually quite traumatic, going through the whole process. One of our committee members, Rachel, I think it took her 6 or 7 years to go to pursue a medical negligence case, which she did win. But it was hard for her. It was very hard because the hospital kind of pushed back all the time. So we always kind of say this to parents come to us, we say, look, you might want to do it, but it's going to be hard. And we tend not to recommend lawyers because there are so many of them. But if they want initial free advice, we say, well, look, you can talk to this woman on our board of experts. We quite often do Q&As as well. So we'll do an Insta Live, for example, where either the solicitor I mentioned or somebody from another firm of solicitors will just answer questions on Instagram that people might have about medical negligence. And sometimes women don't want to take a medical negligence case, but they just want to make a complaint to the hospital. So we talk them through that as well. So yes, we try and put them in. We try and give them as much information about legal advice as we can, and we've actually got a series of frequently asked questions about taking medical negligence action that we've got on our website that people can look at, so they can kind of see exactly what it involves.
Kim, can I say thank you very much on behalf of us all, and we really appreciate the fact that I think you're supposed to be on your holidays even while you're doing that. So you've gone one step further than the rest of us. So thank you so much, Kim. It's been phenomenal for your engagement and all your assistance. I know you were a very active member in Working Group 6 with the communications and the parent group, and in 7 with Katharina. So can we thank you on behalf of all of us and say thank you again for signing in for us this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you again.